The stench of whiskey and desperation hung thick in the air as Rose Emerson watched her father slam his empty glass onto the saloon table. His bloodshot eyes fixed on the magnificent chestnut stallion tied outside the Fort Laramie establishment in the Wyoming Territory of 1876. She knew that look, had seen it 1,000 times before when he was about to make another one of his catastrophically poor decisions. But nothing could have prepared her for what came out of his mouth next, when the tall cowboy in the dust-covered Stetson walked through those swinging doors. "That is one fine piece of horseflesh," her father slurred, pointing through the grimy window at the powerful animal powering the ground outside. Rose felt her stomach twitch as she stood in the corner where she had been waiting for him to finish his afternoon drinking. She was 20 years old, had been taking care of herself and her worthless father since her mother died of fever 6 years ago, and she recognized the dangerous gleam in his eyes. They had been living in Fort Laramie for 3 months now, ever since they had been run out of the last town for his debts, and she had been working as a seamstress to keep them fed while he drank away whatever money he could get his hands on. The cowboy was tall and broad-shouldered, probably around 25 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He moved with the confident grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, and Rose noticed several other patrons glancing his way with a mixture of respect and wariness. "That there is Marcus Anderson," the bartender said quietly. "Owns a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Fair man, but not one to cross." Her father lurched to his feet, swaying slightly as he approached Marcus Anderson at the bar. Rose moved closer, her heart beginning to pound with a sick sense of foreboding. "That your horse outside?" her father asked, his words running together. Marcus turned slowly, his gray eyes assessing the drunk man before him with a single sweeping glance. "It is. I will bet you everything I own for that horse," her father announced loudly, causing several conversations to pause. Marcus took a slow drink from his glass, his expression unreadable. "Not interested in gambling today. I've got something better than money," her father continued, and Rose felt her blood turn to ice. "My daughter, pretty thing, good worker, knows how to cook and sew. She is worth more than any horse." The saloon went completely silent. Rose felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and shame burned through her veins like poison. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but standing in that horrible moment while her father tried to trade her away like livestock. Marcus set his glass down with a controlled movement that somehow seemed more dangerous than any aggressive gesture. "You are offering to trade your daughter for my horse." "That is right," her father said, apparently too drunk to recognize the steel in Marcus's voice. "She is a hard worker, does not complain much, knows her place." Rose found her voice, though it shook. "Papa, please, you cannot." "Quiet, girl. Men are talking." Marcus looked past her father directly at Rose, and she felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. She expected to see disgust or perhaps the calculating look of a man considering livestock, but what she saw instead was something she could not quite name. Anger, certainly, but not directed at her. "This daughter of yours," Marcus said slowly, "does she have a name?" Rose Emerson." "And does Rose Emerson have any say in this transaction?" Her father waved a dismissive hand. "She is my daughter. She does what I tell her." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil from his vest pocket, wrote something quickly, and slid it across the bar to the bartender. "Witness this," he said quietly. He turned back to her father. "All right, I will take your daughter in exchange for my horse. The bartender here will witness that the horse now belongs to you, fair and square." Rose felt the room spin around her. This could not be happening. She could not be traded away like a piece of property, could not be handed over to a stranger no matter how desperate her circumstances had become. "Papa, no," she whispered, but he was already shaking Marcus's hand, already accepting the reins that Marcus pulled from his pocket. "Pleasure doing business with you," her father said with a grin that made Rose want to be sick. Marcus did not return the smile. "The horse is yours. Your daughter comes with me. Right now." Her father was already heading for the door, stumbling in his eagerness to claim his prize. Rose stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened, unable to make her feet move. Marcus approached her slowly, as though she were a frightened animal that might bolt. "Miss Emerson, do you have belongings you need to collect?" She stared at him, this stranger who now apparently owned her, and felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I have a room at the boarding house. My things are there." "Then let us go get them." His voice was surprisingly gentle, and that somehow made everything worse. Rose followed him out of the saloon on numb legs, aware of every whisper and stare that followed them. Outside, her father was already mounted on the beautiful chestnut stallion, admiring his new acquisition. "Rose," he called out cheerfully, as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. "This is the finest horse in the territory, well worth the trade." She could not even look at him. The man who was supposed to protect her, to care for her, had just sold her for an animal. Whatever love she had still held for him despite years of disappointment and hardship evaporated in that moment, leaving only a hollow ache where it had been. Marcus placed a light hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the boarding house. "Where is your father staying?" "Same place I am. Room next to mine. Then we will be quick." They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Fort Laramie, past the familiar shops and buildings that Rose had begun to think of as home. The boarding house was a modest two-story structure run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who had always been kind to Rose despite her father's reputation. Rose climbed the stairs to her small room, feeling Marcus's presence behind her like a physical weight. She owned very little, just a few dresses, some undergarments, her sewing supplies, and a book of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She packed everything into a worn carpet bag with shaking hands. "Is there anything else?" Marcus asked from the doorway. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "What about your father's room?" "I do not care about his things." "Fair enough." They went back down the stairs where Mrs. Patterson stood wringing her hands in the hallway. News traveled fast in a small town. "Rose, dear, is it true?" "Did your father really?" "It is true," Rose said quietly. "I am leaving now. Thank you for your kindness to me, Mrs. Patterson." The older woman pulled her into a quick embrace, whispering in her ear, "Marcus Anderson is a good man, dear. You could have done much worse." It was meant to be comforting, Rose supposed, but it did nothing to ease the crushing humiliation and anger burning in her chest. She had not done anything at all. She had been traded like property, given away without her consent or consideration, and now she was expected to be grateful that her new owner was reportedly decent. Marcus had a wagon waiting outside, pulled by two sturdy draft horses. He helped Rose up onto the seat with a courteous hand, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Wait," Rose said suddenly, looking back toward the saloon. "Your horse. My father has your horse, I know. But we will deal with that shortly." Marcus drove the wagon back to the saloon, where her father was still outside, showing off the stallion to anyone who would look. He was bragging about his cleverness in making such an advantageous trade, oblivious to the disgusted looks some of the townspeople were giving him. Marcus set the brake on the wagon and climbed down. Rose watched as he approached her father with that same dangerous calm she had noticed earlier. "Enjoyed your time with the horse?" Marcus asked pleasantly. Her father grinned. This is the finest animal I have ever seen." You are going to give him back to me," Marcus interrupted, his voice still pleasant but with an edge like a blade underneath. "What? No, we had a deal." "We did. I took your daughter and you took my horse. The deal is complete." Marcus pulled a coin from his pocket and flipped it to her father, who caught it reflexively. "There. I just paid you for your daughter. She is mine, bought and paid for with a witness. Now give me back my horse." Her father's face went red. "That is not how this works." "You cannot, I can, and I am." Marcus took the reins from her father's slack grip and patted the stallion's neck. "This horse is worth about $300. Your daughter is priceless. There is no world in which that trade was ever going to stand. But you agreed." "I agreed to get her away from you," Marcus said, and now there was no mistaking the anger in his voice. "Any man who would trade his own child for an animal does not deserve to keep either one." Rose sat in the wagon, her mind reeling. Marcus Anderson had never intended to keep the deal. He had tricked her father, had manipulated him into giving her up, and now he was taking back his horse as well. Her father was sputtering with rage, but several other men had gathered around, and Rose could see from their expressions that they were on Marcus's side. Trading a daughter for a horse had been shocking enough, but everyone in Fort Laramie knew that Marcus Anderson was a respected rancher, and her father was a drunk who owed money all over town. "You cannot do this," her father shouted. "I will report you to the marshal." "Do that," Marcus said calmly. "Tell him all about how you tried to trade your daughter for my horse. I am sure he will be very interested to hear that story." He led the stallion to the back of the wagon and tied him securely, then climbed back up beside Rose and released the brake. Her father was still shouting behind them, but Marcus paid him no attention, guiding the draft horses down the main street and out of town. They rode in silence for almost half an hour, the town falling away behind them until there was nothing but the rolling prairie and distant mountains. The afternoon sun beat down on them, and Rose felt sweat trickling down her back beneath her faded blue dress. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I apologize for the deception, Miss Emerson, but I could not leave you with a man who would treat you that way." Rose did not know what to say. She was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. "So what happens now? Now I take you to my ranch. You will have a room of your own, meals, safety. You can work if you want to or not. You are not a servant and you are certainly not property. But you paid for me." "I paid your father 1 penny to humiliate him and to make sure there was no question that you are free of him. You do not owe me anything, Miss Emerson. Once we get to the ranch, you can stay as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next." Rose turned to really look at him for the first time. His profile was strong, all sharp angles and weathered skin from years under the sun. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands steady on the reins. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" His jaw tightened. "Because my mother was traded by her father to settle a debt when she was 19 years old. The man who took her was cruel. She died when I was 12, worn out from years of mistreatment. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to keep another woman from suffering the same fate, I would take it." The simple honesty in his words made Rose's throat tight. She looked away, blinking hard against the tears that threatened to fall. "I am sorry about your mother. So am I. But at least something good can come from her suffering if it means you are safe." They fell back into silence, but it was a different quality now, less awkward and more contemplative. Rose watched the landscape roll by, golden grass rippling in the wind, and tried to make sense of her new reality. This morning, she had woken up in her familiar room at the boarding house, worried about her father's drinking but secure in the knowledge that at least she had a roof over her head and work to keep her fed. Now, everything had changed, and she was heading into the unknown with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. The Anderson ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, and Rose caught her breath at the sight. It was beautiful, a sprawling property with a sturdy 2-story house painted white, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and what looked like extensive grazing land stretching out in every direction. It was the kind of home she had dreamed about as a child, before her mother died and her father drank away any chance they had of stability. "This is all yours?" she asked. "Built it up over the last 8 years," Marcus said, and she could hear the quiet pride in his voice. "Started with nothing but a piece of land and determination. Now I've got 20 horses, 30 head of cattle, and 3 men who work for me." He drove the wagon up to the house and helped Rose down. The front door opened, and a weathered older man with a silver beard stepped out, his eyebrows rising when he saw Rose. "Marcus, who is this?" "This is Miss Rose Emerson. She will be staying with us for a while. Rose, this is Henry Mitchell. He has been with me from the beginning, helps run the place." Henry's sharp eyes moved between them, clearly noting Rose's worn dress and cheap carpetbag, the tension in her shoulders, the way Marcus stood protectively close to her. Whatever he thought, he kept it to himself, simply nodding respectfully. "Madam, welcome to the Anderson Ranch." "Thank you," Rose managed. Marcus picked up her bag. "Let me show you to your room. You can rest, clean up, and then we will have dinner. Henry, is Jacob around?" "He and Thomas are checking the north fence. Should be back before sunset." Marcus nodded and led Rose into the house. The interior was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with solid wood furniture and curtains at the windows. He took her upstairs to a small bedroom that faced east, with a window overlooking the prairie. "This was supposed to be a guest room, but I have never had guests," Marcus said, setting her bag on the bed. "There is a basin and pitcher for washing. The privy is out back. If you need anything else, just ask." Rose looked around the room, taking in the clean quilt on the bed, the simple dresser, the way afternoon light slanted through the window. It was more than she had expected, certainly better than the cramped room at the boarding house. "This is very generous," she said quietly. "It is just a room." Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Emerson, I want you to understand something. You are safe here. No one will hurt you or force you to do anything you do not want to do. You have my word on that." She met his eyes, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda, but found only sincerity. "Why should I trust you?" "You should not," he said frankly. "You do not know me. Trust has to be earned, but I hope in time you will see that I mean what I say." After he left, Rose sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for the father she had lost years ago to whiskey and weakness, for the life she had been trying to build in Fort Laramie, for the humiliation of being traded like property in front of a saloon full of people. But she also cried with a strange sense of relief, because for the first time in 6 years, she did not have to take care of anyone but herself. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin and changed into her better dress, a dark green calico that was faded but clean. She brushed out her long brown hair and pinned it back, studying her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. She looked tired, her blue eyes shadowed and her face too thin, but at least she looked presentable. Downstairs, she found Marcus and Henry in the kitchen, working on preparing dinner. Marcus looked up when she entered and something shifted in his expression, though Rose could not quite identify what. "Can I help?" she asked. "You do not have to," Marcus said. "You are a guest." "I would rather be useful." He smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "All right. Can you make biscuits?" "Yes." They worked together in companionable silence, Marcus frying steaks, Henry preparing vegetables, and Rose mixing and rolling out biscuits. It felt strangely domestic, and Rose found herself relaxing slightly despite the strangeness of the situation. Two more men came in as the sun was setting, both young and weathered from outdoor work. Marcus introduced them as Jacob Wells and Thomas Reed, his ranch hands. They were polite to Rose, tipping their hats and greeting her respectfully, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. Dinner was served at a large table in the dining room, and Rose found herself seated between Marcus and Henry, with Jacob and Thomas across from her. The food was simple but plentiful, and Rose realized she had not eaten since breakfast. "So, Miss Emerson," Henry said carefully, "how did you end up coming out to the ranch?" Rose glanced at Marcus, unsure how much to say, but he spoke before she could. Her father was causing trouble in town. I offered her a safe place to stay for a while. It was not exactly a lie, but it also was not the whole truth. Rose appreciated his discretion, though she suspected the full story would make its way out to the ranch eventually. Small towns had long memories and loose tongues. "Well, any friend of Marcus's is welcome here," Henry said warmly. After dinner, Rose insisted on helping clean up despite Marcus's protests. She washed dishes while he dried them, and she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He moved with an easy confidence, comfortable in his own home, and she noticed small details about him. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his hands, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow. "You are staring," he said without looking at her. Rose felt her cheeks heat. "I am sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About why you really did what you did today. Most men would not have intervened." Marcus set down the dish he was drying and turned to face her. "Most men are cowards. They see something wrong and they look away because it is easier than getting involved. I have never been good at looking away. That must make life complicated. Sometimes. But I sleep better at night." They finished the dishes in silence, and then Marcus showed her around the rest of the house, pointing out where things were kept, telling her to help herself to anything she needed. He was careful not to stand too close, careful not to touch her unnecessarily, and Rose found herself grateful for his consideration, even as part of her wondered what it would be like if he were not so careful. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in the small guest room, Rose stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. She had been traded by her father, rescued by a stranger, and now she was living in a ranch house on the Wyoming prairie with 4 men she barely knew. It should have been terrifying, but instead she felt a strange sense of possibility, as though her life had been careening toward disaster and someone had finally stepped in to change its course. She thought about Marcus Anderson, about the pain she had seen in his eyes when he talked about his mother, about the way he had humiliated her father by taking back his horse. He was a complicated man, clearly, with his own scars and motivations. But he had been kind to her, had offered her safety without demanding anything in return, and that was more than most men would have done. Rose fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside her window and the distant whinny of horses in the corral. And for the first time in months, she did not have nightmares about debt collectors or her father's drinking. She woke early the next morning to the sound of voices and movement outside. Dawn light was just beginning to filter through her window, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. Rose dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, finding the kitchen empty but with a pot of coffee already made on the stove. She poured herself a cup and stood at the window, watching as Marcus worked with one of the horses in the corral. He was patient and gentle, his voice low and soothing as he helped the animal accept a saddle. Rose found herself mesmerized by the way he moved, the easy confidence and competence he displayed. "He is good with horses," Henry said from behind her, and Rose jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. "Sorry, did not mean to startle you. It is all right. I was just watching him work." Marcus has a gift with animals. People too, though he would deny it. He brought all of us here when we had nowhere else to go, gave us work and purpose. Henry poured his own coffee and stood beside her at the window. Jacob lost his family to fever 3 years ago, was drinking himself to death when Marcus found him. Thomas was 16 and running from an abusive stepfather. And me, I was too old to work the big ranches anymore, thought I was going to die cold and alone until Marcus offered me a place here. Rose looked at the older man with new understanding. He collects strays, I suppose he does, but he would say he just helps people who need help. Henry smiled. "You are in good hands, Miss Emerson. Please call me Rose." "All right, Rose, and you can call me Henry." Over the next few days, Rose settled into an odd sort of routine. She woke early and helped prepare breakfast, spent her mornings working on mending and sewing projects for the men, and in the afternoons, she often walked the property or helped with smaller tasks around the ranch. Marcus was careful to give her space while also making sure she had everything she needed, and Rose found herself watching him more and more often, noticing the small kindnesses he extended not just to her but to everyone around him. He was patient with Thomas, who was still learning ranch work. He trusted Jacob with important responsibilities, helping the younger man rebuild his confidence. He treated Henry with respect, listening to his advice and never making him feel old or useless. And with Rose, he was unfailingly courteous, treating her like a person of value rather than the burden she feared she might be. On the 4th day, Rose was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Marcus came in looking troubled. "There is a man riding up from town. I think it is your father." Rose felt her stomach drop. She had known this confrontation was inevitable, but she had been hoping for more time to figure out what she wanted to say to him. "I will deal with him," Marcus said. "You do not have to see him if you do not want to." "No," Rose said, setting down her knife with more force than necessary. "I need to face him. I need to tell him what I think of what he did." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I will be right beside you." They went out onto the porch together, and Rose saw her father dismounting from a borrowed horse, looking haggard and angry. When he saw her, his expression shifted to something approximating relief. "Rose, thank God, I am here to take you home." "I do not have a home," Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You made sure of that when you traded me for a horse." "Now, Rose, you know I was not in my right mind. I had been drinking. I did not know what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Rose said coldly. "You saw something you wanted and you traded me to get it. Just like you have been trading away pieces of my life for years to fuel your drinking." Her father's face reddened. "I am your father. You owe me respect." "I owe you nothing. You stopped being my father the moment you sold me." Rose took a step forward, surprised by the strength she felt coursing through her. "I spent 6 years taking care of you, working to keep us fed and housed while you drank away every cent we had. I forgave you 1,000 times, made excuses for you, believed you when you promised to change. But I am done now. You do not get another chance. You cannot stay here," her father blustered. "People will talk. Your reputation, my reputation, was destroyed the moment you tried to trade me for a horse in front of half the town," Rose interrupted. "At least here I am treated with respect." Marcus spoke up then, his voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Emerson, Rose is welcome to stay here as long as she wants. She has her own room, she is safe, and she is free to leave anytime she chooses. Can you say the same for what she had with you? Her father glared at Marcus with open hostility. "You think you are so much better than me. You are not keeping her here out of the goodness of your heart. Every man has an angle." "Then I guess you are judging others by your own standards," Marcus said evenly. "Now I think it is time for you to leave." "Rose, goodbye, Papa," Rose said, and the finality in her voice surprised even her. "I hope you find whatever it is you are looking for at the bottom of a whiskey bottle, because you lost everything else that mattered." She turned and walked back into the house before he could respond, before the tears burning in her eyes could fall. She heard Marcus exchange a few more words with her father, heard the horse being mounted and ridden away, and then Marcus came inside and found her standing in the kitchen with her arms wrapped around herself. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I do not know," Rose admitted. "I thought I would feel satisfied telling him off like that, but instead I just feel sad. You are allowed to feel sad. He is still your father, even if he is not a good one." Rose looked up at Marcus, at the understanding in his gray eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. This man who barely knew her, who had no obligation to her, had shown her more care and respect in 4 days than her father had shown her in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing with me, for everything." "You do not have to thank me, Rose." It was the first time he had used her first name, and hearing it in his deep voice made her pulse quicken in a way she did not quite understand. They stood looking at each other in the kitchen, and Rose felt the air between them grow charged with something she could not name. Jacob's voice calling from outside broke the moment, and Marcus stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get back to work. Will you be all right?" "Yes. I am going to finish making dinner." Over the following weeks, Rose found herself thinking about Marcus more and more often. She watched the way he worked with the horses, the way he treated his men, the way he sometimes stood on the porch in the evenings and stared out at the prairie as though searching for something he could not find. She learned that he was 26, had been on his own since he was 14, had built his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. She also learned that he was lonely, though he would never admit it. He had devoted himself so completely to building his ranch and helping others that he had left no room for his own needs or desires. Rose recognized the pattern because she had lived it herself, always putting her father first, always sacrificing her own happiness for someone else's. One evening about 3 weeks after she had arrived at the ranch, Rose and Marcus found themselves alone on the porch after dinner. The others had gone to their respective quarters, and the night was warm and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Can I ask you something?" Rose said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Of course." "Why have you never married? A man with a ranch like this, you must have had offers." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose I was afraid," he finally said. "Afraid of becoming like the man who married my mother. Afraid that if I let myself care about someone, I would end up hurting them, so I just focused on work instead." "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It is." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were shadowed. "But meeting you has made me wonder if maybe I have been wrong, if maybe being afraid of hurting someone is just another way of being a coward." Rose's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Marcus, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I am not trying to pressure you or make you feel obligated. I just wanted you to know that having you here has changed things for me. You have changed things for me." Rose thought about the man she had met in the saloon 4 weeks ago, the stranger who had stepped in to save her from a terrible fate. She thought about the kindness he had shown her, the respect, the way he made her feel like a person of value instead of a burden. And she thought about the way her pulse quickened when he was near, The way she found excuses to be in the same room with him. The way she had started to imagine what it might be like if this was not just temporary. "You have changed things for me too," she said quietly. "I did not think I could ever trust anyone again after what my father did. But you have shown me that there are still good men in the world. You have shown me what it feels like to be treated with respect and kindness." Marcus reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Rose, I know this is not a conventional situation. I know you came here out of desperation, not choice. But I want you to know that if you decided to stay, if you wanted to make this your home, I would do everything in my power to make you happy. Are you asking me to stay permanently? I am asking you to consider it, to think about whether you could see yourself building a life here with me." He paused, then added softly, "To think about whether you might be able to care for me the way I am starting to care for you." Rose felt tears pricking her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of the overwhelming realization that maybe her life was not ruined after all. Maybe being traded for a horse had been the best thing that ever happened to her, because it had brought her to this place, to this man, to this moment. "I do not have to think about it," she said, squeezing his hand. "I already know. I want to stay, Marcus. I want to build a life here with you." He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Rose Emerson, I am not going to want to let you go." "Then do not let me go," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers and nothing else mattered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though Marcus was afraid she might break or change her mind. But Rose pressed closer, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something that made her head spin and her knees weak. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I have wanted you to do that for weeks," Rose said with a shaky laugh. They stayed on the porch long into the night, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future, stealing kisses under the stars. Rose told him about her childhood before her mother died, about the dreams she had given up, about her love of books and poetry. Marcus told her about building the ranch, about his hopes to expand, about the home he had always wanted to create but never had anyone to share it with. "I want to do this right," Marcus said as the night grew late. "I want to court you properly, marry you respectably, give you all the things you deserve." "You already have given me more than I deserve," Rose said. "You gave me back my life. Then let me give you my life too. Let me spend every day from now on showing you what it means to be treasured and loved." Rose felt more tears sliding down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, yes to all of it. They decided to wait 3 months before marrying, to give Rose time to be certain of her choice and to silence any gossips who might suggest improper motives. During those 3 months, Marcus courted Rose with an old-fashioned courtship that would have made any chaperone proud. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, read poetry to her in the evenings, took her on long rides across his property to show her every corner of the land that would be their home. Rose, for her part, threw herself into making improvements to the house, sewing new curtains, planting a garden, turning the ranch house into a real home. She also spent time getting to know Henry, Jacob, and Thomas better, and they became like family to her, teasing her gently about Marcus's obvious devotion and making plans for the wedding celebration. The only shadow on Rose's happiness came from town, where her father had apparently been telling anyone who would listen that Marcus had stolen his daughter and cheated him out of his horse. Most people ignored him, knowing his reputation, but there were a few who seemed willing to believe his version of events. "Let them talk," Marcus said when Rose expressed concern. Anyone who matters knows the truth. The wedding took place on a beautiful September morning in 1876, in the small church in Fort Laramie. Rose wore a dress she had made herself from ivory silk that Marcus had ordered specially from Cheyenne, and she carried a bouquet of prairie wildflowers. Marcus wore his best suit, and Rose thought he looked impossibly handsome standing at the altar waiting for her. The church was surprisingly full, with many of the townspeople who had witnessed the original incident at the saloon now coming to celebrate the happy ending. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house cried through the entire ceremony, and even the gruff bartender from the saloon had come to pay his respects. Her father did not attend, and Rose found she did not care. She had made her peace with losing him, had accepted that some people would never change, and she refused to let his absence mar the happiest day of her life. "Do you, Marcus Andrew Anderson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. "I do," Marcus said, his gray eyes locked on Rose's face. "And do you, Rose Elizabeth Emerson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Rose said, her voice clear and strong. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Marcus pulled Rose into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both grinning, Rose felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food enough to feed half the territory. Henry, Jacob, and Thomas had spent days preparing, and the result was a party that lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Marcus pulled Rose away from the crowd and led her down to the corral where his horses were watching curiously over the fence. "I want to give you something," he said, leading her to the chestnut stallion that had started everything. "This is Thunder. He is yours now." Rose stared at him. "Marcus, I cannot accept that. He is your best horse. He is a wedding present. Besides, he brought you to me. It seems only fitting that he should be yours." Rose stroked the stallion's nose, tears slipping down her cheeks for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for respecting me, for loving me." Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head. "Thank you for staying. For taking a chance on a stubborn cowboy with too many strays and not enough sense. I would take that chance 1,000 times over." They stood together in the gathering darkness, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Rose thought about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been in the saloon in Fort Laramie, watching her father trade her for a horse, certain her life was over. But it had not been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. The first year of their marriage was everything Rose had dreamed of and more. She and Marcus fell into an easy partnership, working together to run the ranch, making decisions together, building a life that was theirs. The physical side of their marriage was a revelation to Rose, who had never known that such intimacy and passion existed. Marcus was a patient and generous lover, and Rose discovered depths of feeling within herself that she had not known existed. They also discovered that they could fight spectacularly when they disagreed, both too stubborn to back down easily, but they always made up afterward and learned to compromise. Rose learned that Marcus could be overprotective, wanting to shield her from anything difficult or unpleasant, and she had to remind him that she was strong enough to handle life's challenges. Marcus learned that Rose had a fierce, independent streak and a sharp tongue when provoked, and he came to respect and admire her strength even more. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Rose's skills with sewing led her to start making saddle blankets and other tack that became popular in the territory, bringing in extra income. Marcus expanded his horse breeding program, developing a reputation for producing quality animals. Together, they hired 2 more ranch hands and increased their cattle herd. Rose also worked to build relationships with the other ranch wives in the area, hosting gatherings and creating a sense of community that had been missing before. She became known for her kindness and her practical advice, and several women who were in difficult situations found their way to the Anderson Ranch, where Rose helped them find work or safe places to live. "You are collecting strays now, too," Marcus teased her one evening after she had helped a young widow find a position as a teacher in Fort Laramie. "I learned from the best," Rose replied with a smile. In the spring of 1878, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the expression of joy and wonder on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "A baby," he said softly, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Rose asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, maybe. "I do not know anything about being a father." "You know plenty," Rose assured him. "Look at how you have helped Thomas and Jacob. You will be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Rose found herself exhausted more often than she liked, and had to accept help from the men with tasks she usually handled herself. Marcus became even more protective than usual, hovering and worrying until Rose had to firmly tell him to stop treating her like spun glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him exasperatedly one afternoon when he had insisted she rest instead of hanging laundry. "I am not an invalid. I know, I just worry I cannot lose you, Rose." His vulnerability made her soften. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong, the pregnancy is healthy, and we have a good doctor in Fort Laramie. Everything is going to be fine." Their son was born on a cold November night in 1878, after a labor that lasted 14 hours and left Rose exhausted but triumphant. Marcus held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the tiny face of his son. "He is perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at the baby's face, Rose suddenly knew. Michael Andrew Anderson." "After my mother," Marcus said, looking up at her with wonder. "Her name was Michaela. She would have loved him," Rose said. "And she would have been proud of the man you became." Little Michael was a fussy baby who kept them up most nights for the first few months, but neither Rose nor Marcus minded. They took turns walking him around the house, singing to him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Henry, Jacob, and Thomas were equally smitten, competing to see who could make the baby smile first. As Michael grew from an infant to a toddler, Rose and Marcus fell into the rhythms of parenthood, learning to balance ranch work with childcare, exhaustion with joy. Marcus was an attentive father, playing with Michael for hours, teaching him about horses and cattle, carrying him on his shoulders as he did his daily rounds. In 1881, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Rebecca Marie, and their family felt complete. Rebecca had her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was a much calmer baby than Michael had been. The 2 children grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, surrounded by love and security. One afternoon in the summer of 1883, Rose was sitting on the porch watching Marcus teach 5-year-old Michael how to rope a fence post while 3-year-old Rebecca played with a doll nearby. It was a peaceful scene, the kind that Rose had once believed would never be hers. Henry came to sit beside her, his beard now fully white, his movements slower than they had once been. "You look happy," he observed. "I am," Rose said simply. "I know I should not be, given how I got here, but I cannot help being grateful for the path that brought me to this life." "Your father did you a favor in the end," Henry said, "though I doubt he ever realized it." Rose had not heard anything about her father in years. The last she knew, he had left Fort Laramie and headed further west, still chasing whatever dream he thought waited at the bottom of a bottle. She hoped he had found peace, but she no longer felt the need to know. "Marcus did me a favor," Rose corrected. "He saw me when I was at my lowest and chose to help me. He gave me back my dignity, my hope, my future. Everything I have now is because he chose to be the kind of man who does not look away when someone needs help." "He would say the same about you," Henry pointed out. "That you gave him purpose and love and a family, that you made his house a home." Rose smiled, watching as Marcus praised Michael's rope throw and then scooped Rebecca up to kiss her cheek. "I guess we saved each other then." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Michael grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with horses like his father. Rebecca was spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. In 1885, Rose received word that her father had died of liver failure in a mining camp in Colorado. She felt a deep sadness at the news, mourning not the man he had been but the father he could have been if he had made different choices. Marcus held her while she cried, understanding that grief could be complicated. "You ever regret it?" she asked him that night as they lay in bed. "Taking on a stranger's daughter to save her from her father's mistakes?" "Never," Marcus said firmly. "You were never a burden or an obligation, Rose. From the moment I saw you standing in that saloon, looking so scared and brave at the same time, I knew you were special. And every day since has only confirmed it." "I love you," Rose said, the words still carrying the same weight and wonder they had 8 years earlier. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." In 1887, Henry died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. His passing left a hole in the ranch family, but they took comfort in knowing he had spent his final years surrounded by people who loved him, doing work that gave him purpose and pride. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker that read, "Henry Mitchell, friend and family." Jacob eventually married a widow from Fort Laramie and moved to his own small ranch nearby, though he still came to help Marcus with big projects. Thomas grew into a confident young man who became Marcus's right-hand man, managing much of the daily operations of the ranch. Michael and Rebecca grew up strong and healthy, learning from their parents the values of hard work, kindness, and standing up for those who needed help. Rose made sure they knew the story of how she and Marcus met, wanting them to understand that good could come from even the darkest circumstances if people chose to be brave and compassionate. In 1890, when Rose was 34 and Marcus was 39, they sat on their porch one evening and looked out at the ranch they had built together. Michael was 14 now, already as tall as his father and just as skilled with horses. Rebecca was 12, all long legs and big dreams, talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. "Did you ever imagine this?" Rose asked, taking Marcus's hand. "When you walked into that saloon 14 years ago, did you imagine it would lead to all of this?" "No," Marcus admitted. "I just knew I could not stand by and let your father trade you like property. I had to do something." "You did more than something. You changed my entire life." Marcus turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been the day they met. "You changed mine too. Before you, I was just going through the motions, building a ranch but not really living. You taught me what it meant to have a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." Rose leaned against his shoulder. Content in the way only comes from years of partnership and love. "I used to be so angry about what my father did. I felt humiliated and worthless. But now I can see that it was the beginning of everything good in my life. It brought me to you. I am glad it did, though I wish you had not had to suffer that humiliation." "It was worth it," Rose said simply. "Every moment of pain, every moment of fear, it was all worth it to get to this life with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. In the corral, Thunder, now an old horse but still spirited, whinnied at them as if to say good night. The house behind them was full of life and laughter, the land around them prosperous and well tended, the future stretching ahead full of promise. Rose thought back to that day in the saloon, to the moment her father had offered to trade her for a horse, and she could almost be grateful for his weakness. If he had not been so desperate, so foolish, so willing to throw her away, she never would have met Marcus Anderson. She never would have discovered what it meant to be truly loved and respected. She never would have built this beautiful life. Marcus had given the horse back and kept her safe, just as he had promised. But more than that, he had given her a home, a family, and a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. He had shown her that she was worth more than any trade, any price, any bargain. He had shown her what it meant to be treasured. In 1893, Michael announced his engagement to a sweet young woman from Cheyenne named Sarah, and Rose found herself planning her son's wedding with a mixture of joy and bittersweet nostalgia. Watching him with his intended, seeing the way he treated her with respect and love, Rose knew that she and Marcus had succeeded in raising him right. "He learned from watching you," Marcus said one evening as they discussed the wedding plans. "He knows how to treat a woman because he saw how I treated you." "We both learned together," Rose corrected. "How to be partners, how to build a life, how to love someone completely." Michael and Sarah's wedding was a grand affair, with guests from all over the territory. Rebecca was a bridesmaid, glowing with happiness for her brother. And as Rose watched her son exchange vows, she thought about her own wedding 17 years earlier, about the crowd of supportive townspeople who had come to celebrate their happy ending. A year later, in 1894, Rebecca shocked everyone by announcing that she wanted to go to Denver to study at a teaching college. Rose's first instinct was to say no, to keep her daughter safe at home, but Marcus reminded her that they had raised their children to be independent and brave. "Let her go," he said gently. "Let her chase her dreams the way we chased ours." So they sent Rebecca off with their blessings and enough money to support her studies, and the house felt emptier without her spirited presence. But Rose and Marcus adjusted, finding new rhythms as a couple again, remembering what it had been like before children when it was just the two of them building a life together. In 1896, Michael and Sarah gave them their first grandchild, a daughter they named Rose Michaela. Holding the tiny baby in her arms, Rose felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that made her heart ache with happiness. This child, this new generation, existed because Marcus had been brave enough to step in and save a desperate woman 14 years earlier. Rebecca graduated from her teaching college in 1897 and returned to Wyoming, taking a position as a teacher in Fort Laramie. She boarded with Mrs. Patterson, who was now quite elderly but still running the boarding house with determination. Rebecca wrote her parents long letters about her students and her work, and Rose could tell from every word that her daughter had found her calling. As the century drew to a close, Rose and Marcus found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. The ranch was well established and profitable, with Thomas and several other trusted workers handling most of the daily operations. Michael had built his own house on the property and was raising his growing family there, preparing to eventually take over the ranch entirely. On a crisp autumn evening in 1899, Rose and Marcus celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary by riding out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a high meadow with views of the distant mountains. They spread a blanket and watched the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms. 23 years, Rose mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into that saloon. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Marcus said, kissing her temple. Every day with you feels both fresh and eternal. You have gotten more poetic in your old age, Rose teased, though she was only 43 and Marcus was 52, hardly old by any standard. That is your influence, you and your books of poetry. They lay back on the blanket and watched stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Rose thought about everything they had been through together, all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. Marcus, Rose said softly. Yes, thank you for giving the horse back. He laughed, a deep, warm sound that Rose had never grown tired of hearing. Best decision I ever made. That horse was worth $300. You, Rose Anderson, are priceless. We both are, Rose said, rolling to face him. Together we are priceless. As they kissed under the stars, Rose felt the same flutter of excitement and desire that she had felt on their wedding night 23 years earlier. Some things, she thought happily, never changed. In 1901, Rebecca married one of Fort Laramie's most eligible bachelors, a young lawyer named James Hartford. It was a beautiful ceremony, and Rose cried happy tears as she watched her daughter start her own chapter of life. Michael and Sarah's family had grown to include 3 children now, and the ranch echoed with the laughter and play of grandchildren. Marcus was a doting grandfather, patient and playful with the children in a way that made Rose fall in love with him all over again. Watching him teach little Rose Michaela to ride her first pony, seeing him let the younger grandchildren climb all over him during Sunday dinners, Rose felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. One quiet morning in 1903, Rose was working in her garden when she heard a wagon approaching. Looking up, she saw an old woman being helped down by one of the townspeople. It took her a moment to recognize Mrs. Patterson, now well into her 80s and quite frail. Mrs. Patterson, Rose said, hurrying over to help. What brings you all the way out here? I have something for you, the old woman said, pressing a bundle of letters into Rose's hands. Found them when I was cleaning out old rooms. They are from your mother, written to you before she died. Your father left them behind when he moved out all those years ago. I kept them, hoping someday I could return them. Rose stared at the letters, her mother's familiar handwriting making her eyes burn with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. That evening, Rose read the letters with Marcus sitting beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Her mother had written about her hopes and dreams for Rose, about her worries regarding her husband's drinking, about her certainty that Rose would grow up to be strong and kind and capable of great things. She was right, Marcus said when Rose finished reading the last letter. You are all of those things and more. I wish she could have met you, Rose said, wiping her eyes. I wish she could have seen what my life became. She would be proud of you. Proud of the woman you became, the family you built, the life you created from the ashes of what your father tried to destroy. Rose carefully tucked the letters away in her dresser, a precious connection to the mother she had lost so long ago. But she also felt a sense of closure. knowing that her mother had believed in her, had seen the potential within her even as a young girl. The years continued their steady march forward. Michael took over more and more of the ranch operations, with Marcus transitioning into an advisory role. Rebecca and James had children of their own, and Sunday dinners at the Anderson Ranch became a tradition involving dozens of family members across 3 generations. In 1907, on a beautiful June day, Rose and Marcus celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that rivaled their original wedding. The entire community came to celebrate, including many who had been present at that original incident in the saloon 31 years earlier. The current owner of the saloon, a younger man who had bought it from the previous owner, raised a toast. To Marcus Anderson, who showed us all what it means to be a man of honor, and to Rose Anderson, who turned a moment of humiliation into a lifetime of happiness. May we all be so lucky. Rose looked around at the gathering, at her children and grandchildren, at the community they had become part of, at the ranch that had become a symbol of everything good that could grow from choosing kindness over cruelty. And she looked at Marcus, her husband of 30 years, who was still as handsome to her as he had been the day they met, and whose love had only deepened with time. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, pulling her close as music started and couples began to dance. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive," Rose said honestly. "I am thinking that every hard thing I went through was worth it to get to this moment, this life, this love." "I am the lucky one," Marcus countered. "A cowboy who collected strays and built a ranch in the middle of nowhere. I did not deserve someone like you." "We deserved each other," Rose said firmly. "We both knew what it was like to be hurt, to be underestimated, to have to fight for every good thing we got. That is why we worked so well together. We understood each other." They danced together as the sun set over the ranch, surrounded by family and friends, and Rose felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. This was what happy endings looked like, she thought. Not perfect, not without struggles or sorrows, but full of love and purpose and connection. In 1910, Marcus developed a persistent cough that worried Rose. The doctor said it was likely just a lingering chest cold, but Rose insisted he take it easy and rest more. Marcus grumbled about being babied, but secretly seemed to enjoy having Rose fuss over him. "You are just looking for excuses to make me sit still," he accused one afternoon as Rose brought him tea and made him stay on the porch instead of working. "You have worked hard for 42 years building this ranch," Rose said. "I think you have earned the right to rest a little." "I will rest when I am dead," Marcus said, but he was smiling as he said it. The cough eventually cleared up, but the scare reminded both of them that they were not young anymore. Marcus was 63 and Rose was 54, both still healthy and active but also aware that time was precious and not guaranteed. They made a point to spend more time together, to say the important things, to not take for granted the gift of another day. They took long rides across the ranch, visited with their grandchildren, told stories of the old days to anyone who would listen. "You remember the first time I kissed you?" Marcus asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "On this very porch," Rose said with a smile. "You asked if you could kiss me and I told you not to let me go. Best advice anyone ever gave me." Rose leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "I would do it all over again, you know. Every single moment, even the hard parts." "Me too," Marcus agreed. "Especially the hard parts because they led us here." In 1913, Rose was helping Rebecca prepare for the town's 4th of July celebration when she suddenly felt dizzy and had to sit down. Rebecca insisted on fetching the doctor, who examined Rose and then sat down with a serious expression. "Mrs. Anderson, Your heart is not as strong as it should be. You need to take things easier, avoid stress and overexertion." Rose felt a chill go through her. How serious is it? Serious enough that you need to make changes. Rest more, let others handle the heavy work. If you take care of yourself, you have many good years left. She told Marcus that evening and watched his face go pale. "I cannot lose you, Rose, not after everything." "You are not going to lose me," Rose said, taking his hands. "I am going to do exactly what the doctor said. I am going to rest and take care of myself and be here annoying you for many more years. Promise me." "I promise." Rose kept her promise, stepping back from some of her more demanding activities and letting her children and grandchildren help with tasks she used to handle herself. It was hard to accept the limitations of her aging body, but she focused on the positives. More time to read, more time with Marcus, more time to simply enjoy the life they had built. On a warm spring day in 1915, Rose and Marcus took their grandchildren on a picnic to the meadow where they used to go for privacy. Little Rose Michaela was now 21 and engaged to be married. Michael and Sarah's other children ranged in age from 19 down to 10, and Rebecca's 3 children were teenagers. It was a large, noisy, wonderful group, and Rose felt her heart overflow with love as she watched them play and laugh. "Look at what we made," Marcus said softly, his arm around her shoulders. "All of this, Rose, all of these people exist because I walked into a saloon 39 years ago and could not stand by while your father tried to trade you. All of this exists because you were brave enough to care," Rose corrected. "Because you chose to be the kind of man who helps instead of looking away." They watched their grandchildren chase each other through the grass. Their laughter carried on the wind, and Rose thought about the legacy they were leaving. Not just the ranch, though that was substantial, but the legacy of kindness, of standing up for what was right, of choosing love over fear. In 1918, the world was in turmoil with the Great War raging in Europe, but the Anderson Ranch remained a haven of peace and stability. Rose and Marcus, now in their 60s, spent most of their time on the porch or in the garden, holding hands and watching the world go by at a slower pace. "Do you ever think about that day in the saloon?" Rose asked one afternoon. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had just ordered your drink and left?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but then I think about all I would have missed. You, the children, the grandchildren, this life we built. And I cannot imagine any alternate path being better than the one I chose when I decided to step in." "I used to be so angry at my father," Rose admitted. "But now, all these years later, I can almost forgive him. Because if he had not been so weak and foolish, I never would have found you. That does not excuse what he did. No, it does not. But I can choose to focus on the good that came from it rather than the pain of the moment. I can choose to be grateful for where I ended up rather than bitter about how I got here." Marcus pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "You are a wiser woman than I am a man." "We balance each other out," Rose said with a smile. "We always have." In 1920, they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren. The party was smaller than their 30th anniversary, with Marcus and Rose both preferring quiet gatherings these days, but it was no less joyful. Michael gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my parents, who showed me what marriage should look like, what partnership, respect, and love really mean. You built something rare and precious, and all of us are better for having witnessed it." Rebecca added her own words. "You taught us that our circumstances do not define us, that we can choose courage over fear, love over bitterness, hope over despair. Thank you for showing us how to live well." Rose looked at Marcus through happy tears, and he looked back at her with those storm-gray eyes that still made her heart skip after all these years. "We did all right," he said quietly. "We did better than all right," Rose replied. "We did something extraordinary." As they grew older, Rose and Marcus spent more time reminiscing about their life together. They talked about the early days of the ranch, about learning to work together, about the first time they realized they were in love. They talked about raising their children, about the joys and challenges of parenthood, about watching their family grow and flourish. "What would you say to your younger self?" Rose asked one evening. "If you could go back to that day in the saloon and tell yourself one thing, what would it be?" Marcus thought for a long moment. "I would tell myself to trust my instincts, to trust that stepping in to help you was the right thing to do, even though it was unconventional and risky. And I would tell myself to prepare for the greatest love story of my life." "That is sweet," Rose said, squeezing his hand. "I would tell myself that being traded for a horse was not the end of my story, just the beginning of the best chapter. I would tell myself to be brave enough to accept help, to trust again, to open my heart even when it felt too dangerous." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars come out over the ranch they had built together. This land, this home, this family, it was all a testament to what could be created when two people chose love and partnership over fear and isolation. In 1923, at the age of 72, Marcus's health began to fail. The doctor said his heart was giving out, and there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Rose moved their bedroom downstairs, so Marcus did not have to climb stairs, and she spent every moment she could by his side. "I am not ready to leave you," Marcus said one afternoon, his voice weak but his eyes still sharp. "I am not ready to let you go," Rose replied, tears streaming down her face. "But we have had 46 years together, my love. 46 beautiful years that I would not trade for anything." "It is not enough. I want 46 more." Rose climbed into bed beside him, careful of his frail body, and held him close. "Then we will have them in whatever comes next, because I refuse to believe that a love like ours ends just because one of us stops breathing." Marcus died peacefully 3 days later with Rose holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "Thank you for staying. Thank you for keeping me safe," Rose whispered back, and then he was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that left Rose feeling hollow and lost. She had been Rose Anderson for 46 years, had been Marcus's wife for longer than she had been anything else. Without him, she did not know who she was supposed to be. But her children rallied around her, reminding her that she was still a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. She was still the woman who had survived being traded by her father, who had built a life from nothing, who had loved fiercely and completely for nearly 5 decades. Slowly, painfully, Rose learned to live with the grief. She spent her days in the garden Marcus had helped her plant, on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, in the bedroom where they had laughed and loved and dreamed together. She felt his presence everywhere, in every corner of the ranch, in every memory that surfaced. On what would have been their 47th anniversary, Rose visited Marcus's grave on the hill overlooking the ranch. Someone, probably Michael, had left fresh wildflowers there. Rose sat on the grass beside the headstone and talked to her husband as though he could still hear her. "I miss you every moment of every day," she said quietly, "but I am also grateful for every moment we had. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You showed me what love really means, and you left me with a legacy I can be proud of. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this family. All of it exists because you chose to be brave in a moment when most men would have looked away." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of prairie flowers, and Rose felt a sense of peace settle over her. Marcus was gone, but what they had built together remained. Their love story, which had started in such an unlikely way, had created ripples that would extend far into the future. Rose lived for 3 more years after Marcus's death, spending her time with family and maintaining the home they had built together. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had given back a horse and kept a woman safe, about the love that had grown from such an improbable beginning. On a warm summer evening in 1926, 50 years after that fateful day in the saloon, Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70. She was buried beside Marcus on the hill, their headstones side by side, overlooking the ranch they had built and the family they had created. At her funeral, Michael told the story one more time, making sure that everyone gathered understood the legacy his parents had left. "My father could have walked away that day. It would have been easier, safer, less complicated. But he chose to step in. He chose courage over convenience. And my mother chose to trust him, to build a life with him, to create something beautiful from a moment of pain and humiliation. Together, they showed us all what is possible when people choose love and kindness and bravery." The ranch continued to thrive under Michael's management, and then under his children's management, and then under their children's. The story of how it all began, of a father who traded his daughter for a horse and the cowboy who gave the horse back and kept her safe, became family legend, passed down through generations as a reminder of where they came from and the values they were built on. In a small town in Wyoming, in a meadow overlooking miles of prairie and distant mountains, 2 headstones stand side by side. The inscriptions are simple: Marcus Andrew Anderson and Rose Elizabeth Anderson, beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents. But anyone who knew them, anyone who heard their story, understood that those simple words could never capture the depth of what they had shared or the legacy they had left behind. Their love story had started with betrayal and desperation, with a drunken father's terrible decision in a dusty saloon. But it had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of choosing kindness and courage in moments when it would be easier to look away. Marcus had given the horse back and kept Rose safe, and in doing so he had given her so much more: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And Rose, who had once believed her life was over when she was traded away like property, had created a legacy that would live on for generations. She had shown her children and grandchildren that circumstances do not define destiny, that it is possible to build something beautiful from even the darkest beginnings, and that real love is not about grand gestures but about choosing each other, every single day, through all of life's joys and sorrows. Their story became a legend in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, told and retold until fact and myth blended together. But the essential truth remained unchanged. A cowboy had seen a woman in need and had chosen to help her, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. In a wild and often cruel frontier, they had created a haven of love and kindness, and their descendants carried that legacy forward into a new century and beyond.